so many things. The dates are September 23rd through 25th. There's V and there's V+, and you can learn about the difference and how to register on the Communication Network website, but check it out. Usually the DC crew will organize some sort of local gathering on site, but this year we're trying to figure out how to do that, to have a sense of community with its virtual. So even if it's just through screens, we will soon be in touch with everyone who signed up for the DC chapter to offer an opportunity we think we're going to call pods, which is Alex McClellan from WWF's great suggestion, a little VPod gathering, which would just give DC people an opportunity to connect in a smaller group and share ideas around the conference. So we'll send more information about that opportunity via email. Next, on behalf of the DC leadership team, if she's on, I wanted to welcome Kate Chatskin from the Annie E. Casey Foundation to the leadership group. We're really excited to have her. She's replacing Jill Schwartz, who has served for a long time on the DC chapter and is still actively involved in ComNet on the board. But thank you, Jill, for everything you did. We really hope we can be in person soon to like do a proper toast to you and welcome Kate. And with that, just a little housekeeping. So you can unmute at any point to ask questions when we move into Q&A, or if you would prefer, please feel free to use the chat function and I'll keep an eye on that and can read out questions. So whatever you'd like. I'm just gonna kick off the conversation with Alex and we'll have a little conversation that I'll help facilitate, but then I'll move it into audience Q&A. And we are recording. And so this is totally informal and feel free to ask whatever's on your mind as we get started. So Alex, thanks for making time to do this today. After we've had a couple prep conversations, and I know that you are home kind of part facilitating teaching of your kids who are virtual learning, as well as trying to do your day job like so many people. So you've got a full plate. Thank you for making time tonight to do it.
Yeah, it's a daily struggle, but you know, it's a daily struggle a lot of us are sharing.
Yeah, we're all in it together.
Right.
I wanted to kick things off by saying, you know, you and I talked a couple days ago and you said something that I thought was a really great point. You said, any story can be told in any medium. And I really liked that because I think often as communicators, sometimes we get hung up on a particular medium or platform or something we have in our heads. So I wanted to ask you, kind of given the changes of what's going on with COVID and just everything in the world right now, like what are some of the changes you're observing in terms of shifts in medium and, you know, particularly with people not doing as many live action shots as when we weren't all socially distancing?
Yeah. So I guess I'll answer to start with like what happened for us in March. You know, we went remote basically when everyone else went remote. And our business just like fell off a cliff, right? April, there was like nothing, so everyone was really freaked out. And then May, things started to come back. And sort of late May, early June, all of a sudden, things got really busy. And something we kept hearing over and over again was, well, we were going to do a live action production, right? We were going to do a documentary, or we were going to do, you know, kind of a talking head video, right? Like kind of a more standard shoot interview video. And now we can't. And so we'd really like to try animation. For better or worse, we were obviously not able to capture all of those projects because, you know, we only have so much capacity. But basically since then, I would say that's actually been a pretty constant thing we're hearing is like, well, we still have the budget and we still have the need to communicate something. And so how can we do that? I know some people are taking some people's video budgets are actually going up by a lot because they're taking their events budget and they're moving that to video. Or some people are even taking like travel budget and moving that to like online events. And so obviously some organizations have taken big hits, but a lot of them are, you know, they're from an endowment or they've got some other sort of source of funding. And really they're just trying to figure out how can we tell stories in a way that is still viable. And online video was always, it was on a huge curve. You know, video was big and it was going to continue to get bigger. But animation and motion graphics all of a sudden are also on this like interesting rising tide that is destroying all boats. So it's sort of a very strange position for us to be in. I don't know how much the group wants to like watch videos versus have conversations. And so, you know, I definitely don't want to like bombard with video, but I also know that this is a video event. And so, I mean, Anne, what do you think? Should we, like, there's one specific piece that I thought we could watch that's explicitly came to us with, we were going to shoot a documentary and now we're doing animation, and they made that pivot. And so I thought that would be interesting to watch, but, you know, happy to follow the group's lead.
Yeah, I say let's watch at least one video.
Okay.
Those of you who signed up must have been ready for that. They're not long, right? It's not like you're watching a documentary. So we'd love to see some examples. That'd be great.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. So you should be seeing a QuickTime window.
Yes.
And, okay. I'm just going to. All right. So this is a piece for Ericsson, the technology company. It's through Politico Focus, which is Politico's sponsored content brand studio. It initially was going to be a live action documentary in which they sent crews to, I think maybe they were going to Sweden and they were going to Texas, and they were, you know, going to make a documentary, make a brand story about the importance of intellectual property protections for invention. And then all of a sudden they couldn't shoot. I think they were scheduled to shoot April 1 or, you know, somewhere in there. And obviously they couldn't. And so we did this. Please shout if the audio isn't working.
I was never one of those kids who wanted to take things apart. For me, inventing was always about building. The first device I ever built sits on my office shelf. It's a digital clock that I made from a kit. In many ways, it's the epitome of the collaboration that fuels inventions. I was only able to build it because other inventors had developed and standardized its components, like its voltages and circuitry. And leveraging their inventions, I constructed something greater than the sum of its parts. Today, my work creating communications technologies and developing 5G standards is more satisfying than I could have imagined when I started building that clock. It transforms healthcare, education, public safety, manufacturing, and more.
Inventors like Mark are pioneering the technologies of tomorrow thanks to research and development made possible by a strong patent system. One that allows inventors to share their ideas without sacrificing recognition, and allows companies like Ericsson to earn a return on our investments, enabling all innovators to work together by sharing their best ideas. A working patent system benefits all. According to the US Chamber of Commerce, economies are 26% more competitive in countries with strong IP protection. The European Patent Office found that 45% of total economic activity in the EU originates from IP-intensive industries.
So my team works every day to help networks carry data more efficiently throughout the world. These networks rely on a continuously evolving standard that allows devices to be used anywhere. We've seen mobile networks improving from 3G to 4G to 5G. Now we see wireless systems getting smarter, delivering more data more reliably using less energy. We can't create these networks alone. We collaborate with companies around the world to develop standards that we can all build on and benefit from.
Global cellular standards form the uniform ecosystem that allows for interoperability between networks and devices. A strong patent system assures inventors that their ideas will be protected. As a result, businesses bring products to market faster, technology evolves, and innovation flourishes.
Working on the 5G standard has been incredibly fulfilling. especially when I learn about researchers leveraging cutting-edge infrastructure to create technologies like haptic robotic hands that will allow surgeons to perform surgeries from anywhere in the world. And that's just one example of the many ways inventors are able to impact lives when they're empowered to build together. Thanks to 5G, the impossible becomes possible.
All right, so that's a video. It's funny, there's a scene there at the end where there's a teacher teaching math remotely through a tablet. And I did not know that that would foretell my future so accurately.
That would be your life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Watching that and thinking about, I mean, that was a pivot a client made because of COVID. I know that sometimes there's a myth out there, you and I have talked about it a little bit, that animation's only for explainer videos. I don't want to see your head explode or anything, but like, how, you know, what's your response when you hear that, you know, knowing how deep you are in this space?
Yeah. I think anyone who says that is probably not even thinking about the other media that they consume, because you see effective animations in advertising. We're in DC. I think a lot of the folks here are still in DC, unless you've escaped to West Virginia or Maine or wherever else people have escaped to. But in DC, you know, a lot of us are Vox viewers, right? We watch there's a lot of journalism consumed here in DC, and it's clear that the world of journalism has embraced animation. And though those are explainers, it's different from like the product explainers that we had that dominated YouTube for the first, you know, 5 to 10 years, 5 years or so. The thing I'm really excited about these days is telling emotional stories. I see some of the people here were actually at a talk that I gave a few weeks ago at the nonprofit marketing conference, the AMA's conference, all about emotional storytelling through animation. So I don't want to like retread ground too much, but I actually think in many ways you can even better connect with people through animation. You can certainly do a lot of things. Like one of the things I love about it is that you can go in and see things at different depths, right? So like an example I always talk about is like, I can hold up my hand, and on a classic video, you could see my hand, but in animation, I can hold it up, and then you can go in and you can see the blood vessels, and you can see like the interesting structure of what's happening. And then you can zoom really far out, and you can see the whole city and like the interesting ecosystem that is the city. And you can go out again, and you can like constantly shift scales. And with camera video, you're really stuck with what a camera can see. And so many stories aren't actually at that scale. So that's a thought I have about that.
And talk a little bit more about emotional connection and kind of personal storytelling in that medium.
Yeah. So one of the things that's been interesting about this moment, and honestly, we started doing it a couple years ago, is actually using a lot of the documentary techniques to capture the audio for a story. And so going and actually we'll send like remote interview kits like podcasters do, where, you know, it's a nice microphone and you hook it up to your computer and you do like a live monitored recording session. That's actually how we captured the audio for this Ericsson piece. But I also know some folks are sending remote camera packages. Some people are even just capturing audio through a Zoom call. We're doing a series of videos right now, actually, that we did that. We just ripped the audio from a Zoom call. And I think that's a big piece of it, is using real people and actually getting their stories. That's the storytelling that a documentarian and someone who does a lot of documentary will be familiar with. All of those techniques continue to work in animation. Like, it's all the same. It's the same as the podcast story, the radio drama. It's just that then you take that and you add a whole other layer of meaning through illustration and through motion. And of course, music. I'm a big believer that music is actually the carrier of the emotion of a piece. And so we've been doing a lot of like custom composition and working with composers lately, which has been really awesome. Yeah.
And talk a little bit about like when a client comes to you, or organization comes to you and has an idea, or maybe they don't even have an idea yet. They just have a policy objective or a fundraising goal, or they want to tell their institutional organizational story. They have a dollar amount. How do you help narrow focus and think about objective and medium? And you and I had a conversation the other day about kind of production and then promotion,
Yeah.
without, sharing all your secrets. I mean, talk us through just kind of how you help clients and organizations conceptualize.
Yeah, I'm not at all a believer in secrets, so I'll just be totally open. It's a small point, but I'll make it first, which is the promotion piece. We started out in the nonprofit space exclusively. We started out, I guess the World Bank is sort of a weird entity, but the World Bank was one of our biggest clients. The Pew Trust is a big client, and we've continued to work in that space. We work with a lot of large nonprofits. And what I've seen over time is that the delta between the amount that corporate or brand clients are willing to spend on promotion and the amount that nonprofits are willing to spend on promotion just keeps growing. And the problem is that the market for video attention, which is entirely arbitrated by Google and Facebook, has become much more.
Facebook.
Sorry, I just said Google and Facebook and my phone decided to open Facebook. The market is much more accommodated to those platforms. And so they've become pay to play in a way that is like kind of shocking, and I know is probably really disturbing to everyone here. So basically at this point, I advise that if you're going to produce a piece of content, you have to have some amount of money for promotion. Because, just to use a sort of normal budget for us, if we're doing a $35,000 video and it gets 100 views, which honestly on a lot of owned YouTube channels is common. I mean, that's $3,500 a view, right? Or $350. My math is not there, but I never do math live in a conference session. It's a very expensive view. But if you were to put just 10% of that budget, if you were to put 3,500 in, all of a sudden you now have 40,000 views or 60,000 views. And now your cost per view is much lower. So like I would change a mindset somehow about thinking about what does a video cost to actually think about what the cost per view target is and say like, how many people do I want to see this? Can I define that audience? Because if you're going to use a platform like YouTube or Facebook, there are very intricate tools about how to pick an audience. So if you don't know about that, I would try to look into that. But also figuring out exactly who your audience is and then saying, okay, what is it worth it to me that this type of person, right? A nonprofit executive or a, grant maker kind of person that sees this video, is it worth $2? Okay, maybe build the budget back from that. I don't know, nobody does that, but I know brands do it. So I think that's an interesting sort of thing. And just for context, when we do work for brands, they're typically doing 10x the production budget on promotion. So, we're doing, like right now, we're doing a series of videos for a big brand. The production budget's $100,000. The promotion budget is $1 million. And I'm not going to argue whether one's better or not, but that's what people are seeing. I said it was a small point about promotion, but then I talked a lot about it.
I think that's a really important point because as communicators, we sometimes are, I mean, assuming reach is your goal, you know, and you have a particular audience, you really, policymakers or whatever, as you outlined, you really want to make sure you get it in front of them. We can sometimes get lost in we've created the beautiful thing, but we have to make sure people actually see the beautiful thing and take an action that we want them to take, right? And I think that is a new mindset, particularly for nonprofit communicators who may not have a lot of budget, right? I mean, those can be hard choices sometimes for those of us in the, you know, nonprofit space.
Yeah, and reach as a generic goal is kind of a silly goal. To some degree, maybe it's helpful because you can then turn to another funder or something and say, hey, we've talked to this many people, and that itself is valuable. But like, we've been hired to do, let's say, $30,000 videos for an audience of like 5 people before, because it is honestly worth $6,000 a view, right? And I think we've all been in that situation where there's like one key decision maker who's in charge of a huge amount of money, and you want to make sure, or maybe not money, but power in some other way, right? They're really important audience members. And so I wouldn't fixate on like what is cost per view generically. It's like, with your audience goal, what are your genuine concerns? I remember we did a project a long time ago. Actually, it was with a group at Pew back when there was Pew Environment that was separate.
Right.
And the goal for that campaign really was to address the Pacific Fisheries Management Group and to get them to like change the way that they were thinking about a particular regulation. And so at the end of the day, the audience was this board of people, and it was really important, and it worked. And you know, the video can also that video got picked up by the New York Times because someone at Pew did a really good job of taking the video and then doing the PR work of saying, hey, you should write about this. This is interesting. And it got featured. And that was like, some decision makers even cited that, having seen it through the New York Times. So videos can be used in lots of different ways. And I know that's just one example, but the potential for earned media is also a value, I guess. Long ago, you asked about the what I walk through in terms of, say you have a goal, and yeah, I'd say it's fixating on who that audience is, and then also who the influencers of that audience are. So there's been a lot of talk about 5G lately in DC over the last 5 years. It's been a really big trend, and a lot of folks have as their ultimate goal is influencing the FCC. But what they want to do then is figure out who those follow-on people are, like who are the dominoes that knock over the FCC or the people at the FCC. So that's like classic PR kind of stuff. And I just want to make sure when I'm in an exploratory conversation that they've thought through that journey, that like, okay, from exposure to video message, what will happen then? Okay, and then what will happen then? And then what will happen then? Are we supporting all those things too? Because otherwise we're just making a video.
Kate put a good question into the chat about, you know, kind of beyond social platforms and Google boosting, et cetera. What are some other, and we're going a little deep on promo, but let's do that and then we'll come back. What are some other promotion tactics? You mentioned earned media. Have you seen, you know, organizations you've worked with do anything else that you thought was, you know, really spot on or smart? Or should just be part of our standard toolkit, whether or not, you know?
I think I have 2 answers to that. One ignores the pandemic. And so it may not be relevant right now, but I think when you've gathered people in person in a conference hall or something, your cost per view should be very high, because the odds of that actually making an impact are also really high. That like, to give a group of 200 people in a conference or 1,000 people at a conference a really, really great summary of what you're trying to give them, I think can be really powerful. I'm a huge believer in event video, and standing out at events and conferences. We've done a number of really cool activations in the trade show context, where you're walking along and something grabs you and it sucks you in, and you have this experience. And if you really have a transformative experience through a piece of media, and you take that back and you remember it a year later, I mean, the value of that is so high. So I think like trying to maybe think beyond the timeline of like, oh yeah, we're going to post that to our Twitter and we're going to post it to our YouTube, but like, where else can we put video? One of the things I've been really excited about, obviously we can't do it right now, but Metro is installing all of these amazing screens in all the stations. They're not that expensive to program on. And that stands out because most of the stuff that gets put up there isn't very good. So if you take serious production budgets and then you put them in an unusual place, it's really fun. Obviously there's a lot of good stuff on the screens already, but like, it's beyond like, oh, that's just another cool video in my Facebook timeline. It's like, oh, how interesting. It's a vertical format, and maybe you've got stuff that's like, because some of them are like 3 screens, you can dance stuff between the screens. And I think that's cool, like figuring out other ways to use video. I said there were 2 things and I didn't write the other one down.
That's okay. When you think of it, we'll come back to it. I wanted to get back to this fun COVID period we're all living through, and talk a little bit about, now here we all are on Zoom and everything has become video calls, and it strikes me that the amount of video we're all either engaged in every day or consuming, because we're not going out and socializing anymore, now we're watching whatever show, is just grown exponentially, right? What are you observing in terms of changes, either you're kind of, in line with organizations as they're creating now, or just things you're observing in the ecosystem because of this period and how it may affect us in the future for how we're, engaging with video content?
I shouldn't talk about TikTok all that much, but obviously it is relevant. However, I think most of our audiences are not there, so I can probably just say, oh, someone says I should talk about TikTok. Okay. TikTok is a weird platform, and what's cool about it is that it's actually much more focused on virality than any other platform. They will automatically seed 100 views for every piece of content across a representative sample of users, because they're interested in what will spread virally, whereas YouTube, Facebook, Instagram have historically been way less interested in that. In some ways, they actually want to be the guardians of virality. They don't want the content to necessarily drive virality. They want the ad spend to drive virality. And TikTok is genuinely different in that way. However, the art form is still, I don't know, I still have this like weird elitist feeling about TikTok and about Instagram stories, to be honest, which is just like, I want higher quality motion, right? Like I'm one of these people who's like, I really want to see amazing cell animation in the stuff that I consume. And that's just not the aesthetic of the network. And so I find it really interesting as an observer, as a person who works in advertising, as a content producer. I have not yet seen anyone doing anything I personally find interesting or aesthetically relevant to what I want to consume. Yeah, that's my,
have a tough audience in that regard, though, right? I mean,
that's true.
Yeah.
True. Yeah, I mean, my Instagram feed probably looks different from a lot of other Instagram feeds.
Do you think like audiences are going to tire of, I mean, because there was such, and authenticity had become a buzzword of late, and are we all going to be super tired of seeing each other in such authentic ways? And we're really going to rush to like highly produced, like, you know, do you think there will be a backlash like a year from now? We're all like, the last thing I want to do is see someone in their kitchen with their kids running around. I want to go back to fantasy world. Or do you think we're kind of here to stay? I mean, I know I'm asking you to make a prediction that no one can really make, but I'm just curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think yes. But I also think that something that I've always been really fascinated by is the way in which storytellers appeal to different levels of audience affinity or audience investment. So I know this is very different from what we're that's fair, yeah. One of the things that I've been really fascinated by, and I know it's totally different from what we're talking about, but what was the show, the amazing zombie show that I now don't remember, that was on AMC? I thought it was on AMC.
The Walking Dead?
The Walking Dead, thank you. So The Walking Dead was this amazing show that had branched out of this graphic novel universe. And there were also like online fan groups, and there were people writing fan fiction. And then I think it was AMC, whoever aired it, I think that was it. Right afterwards, they put on a talk show called The Talking Dead, I think it was. And basically what they did is they acknowledged that like most of their audience doesn't care about all this other content. Most of this audience just wants to watch our show, but some of our audience wants to see everything, right? It's sort of the classic idea of the DVD extras. But this was a franchise that honestly isn't necessarily more appealing than any other franchise. It's just that they acknowledge and they cared for their super fans. And I actually think, and I'm bringing it back to us, I think this is relevant in the nonprofit space and the cause space. I think some communicators are really good at getting new people in. And like, that's what they're focused on, is like top of the funnel. I want to pique some interest, right? And some communicators are really good at like the white papers and engaging with that hardcore audience. And I think most communicators are probably not good at every stage. And so stuff like, I mean, we're recording this video, right? Like, no one's going to watch this video, except someone is going to watch this video. And isn't it cool that for the person who's genuinely interested in this topic has an opportunity to do that? So I think that like, yes, most people, especially people like me and a lot of people here I have 2 little kids, and like, this is a really stressful time. I'm super stretched. I'm not watching any of my shows. I'm not doing anything. I'm really just working and taking care of my kids. For me, I'm not going to engage with this content, right? But then there are people who have actually a lot of time, or they want to lose themselves in professional development or in strategy. And so I think that like creating content for that whole layer, like every layer of people who are really interested, I think is just super cool. And I think that's part of what I'm excited about all of the podcasts and the Zoom webinars and all that stuff. Is just, it may not be for you, but there are super fans, even of a particular organization. You can think about that with internal communications. Like, some people want to hear what the CEO had for breakfast and why that was like important for them, but most people don't. But it's cool that we're actually addressing that audience also.
So let's talk one question, and lots of good questions are coming in on chat, and we'll get through them. One question someone sent me, which I think is great, is, you know, and I'll frame it in terms of this time in life. I mean, not just COVID, but you know, BLM, racial inequality, the election, climate change. There's a lot going on right now. Are you observing anything that's particularly breaking through in terms of what we would call like social good audiences, you know, people who are really trying to make a difference, if we can think about, you know, that group in a particular way?
I want to say no, And the reason I want to say no is because I think the news cycle is too fast.
Mm.
And I think that I'm a Twitter user, and what is trending in the morning is not what's trending in the afternoon. And I mean, I'm sure a lot of the people in this audience have read or have opinions on Ezra Klein and his book, Why We're Polarized. But I think it makes a super strong argument for the fact that a lot of us have basically drawn our battle lines, and we have our stories and we're sticking to our stories. And I think that that's true with all of those sort of really high profile movements that you've talked about. I think there's almost no movement, right? A friend of mine, Tony Kopechny, he's got a really awesome data-driven communications firm. They recently did a study of basically sentiment analysis of BLM over time. And there was a spike and now it's gone, right? And, I was looking into some data recently, and, most Americans' views have reverted to the mean again. Most white Americans' views have reverted to the mean again. There was a movement, but yet again, I don't know. I worry that like there's so many people chasing attention, and we're all chasing whatever that feeling is of just, and I don't know. I also maybe, as I said, I'm super stretched thin. I'm not consuming a lot of content. I could be totally off base, but like, that is the context for that answer of no, but I don't have a strong attachment to that answer. I'd be happy to be told I'm wrong.
That's fair. All right, everyone, I'm going to ask Alex one more question, and then we'll turn to opening Q&A. And you can either come off mic at that point or just put things in chat. We have a couple of questions in chat we'll deal with. But Alex, before we do that, I just wanted to address the question of budget, because I know that that's a huge range, and particularly for those of us in the nonprofit space, some of us have bigger budgets than others. Kind of how do you think about different ranges for, different video production?
Yeah. Okay. So a couple of thoughts there. For context, I think that we are like medium expensive in terms of the range of people, the range of providers out there. And so, as I said earlier, I'm just going to be super open about both our budgeting and what I see out there. So at the super low end, I know we're not talking about live action versus animation, but one thing I think about is that you can produce a decent quality interview B-roll, kind of like standard talking head video for very, very little money. I'm not saying it's world-class, but like something that can go on a Facebook page, you can honestly do with like a lapel mic that you can plug into your phone, and you have decent lighting. I mean, there are techniques you should use, but like you can do something pretty cheaply for like less than 10 grand. I'd say if you're like, let's put numbers on things. If you have less than 10 grand, that's what you should do. You should just produce a really simple interview video. There are people who do animation for less than 10 grand. I think it is of a quality level that it actually reflects poorly on the organization doing it. Because what you get is a lot of like really templated kind of looks that lots of other people have, right? You get kind of the standard like whiteboard sort of look, which is actually usually generated with something like VideoScribe, I think is one of the tools that does it. I think they're cool, but I would rather just see an infographic at that point. Above 10,000, when we started out as Duke and Duck, our standard budgets were like $15,000 to $25,000. I still think there are like good studios that can do that budget. It's not us anymore, but they are out there. freelancers are also really a great option. If you have good storytellers in-house, you just don't have the technique to like make the thing. That's where you could spend 10 grand and hire a good freelancer. You're doing all the storytelling and they're doing the final execution. For us, we're a soup to nuts sort of shop, right? We've got a producer who spent 12 years at Pixar. He writes a lot of our stuff. He's amazing. He's like this big story guy. And we also have, 9 other people doing various artistic things. So we've become more expensive over time. For us, our sweet spot is in that like 35 to 50 grand. Like that video I showed earlier is a little over that range, but it's in that sort of range. One other thing I would note about budget is like at the high end, let's say 200,000 and above, at that point, you actually, at that point, you actually are maybe better off with animation because you can spend high 6 figures on a live action shoot traveling all over the world, and you end up getting a documentary that looks like a lot of other documentaries. Whereas if you spend $200,000, say, on like an animated piece, it's going to win lots of awards. It's going to get tons of attention. The earned media potential is huge, right? You can go to festivals. Like a $250,000 animated piece is going to win some festivals and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's cool. Random thoughts on budget. Yeah.
Do you guarantee festival wins as part of the contract?
I think wins, no. But I think if you had that budget and that was your goal and you were willing to let your production partner make the creative decisions that they need to do, yes. And Jamie points out, there are lots of festivals. I don't think you can guarantee win, but you can definitely guarantee placements.
All right, I want to be fair to people who've asked some questions in chat previously. So Ted Chamberlain, one of my Pew colleagues, is on, and he had asked a little while ago, kind of what are some of the best practices you follow for, and this is about social media, Facebook versus Twitter versus LinkedIn versus YouTube versus Instagram. And I don't know how much, social video you're producing right now, Alex, but do you have thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah. Twitter and Facebook, if that's your primary audience, it should be square, not widescreen. So that's a 1:1 aspect ratio. And the reason for that is that your phone is this shaped. So a widescreen video is only like this tall on your newsfeed, but a square video is this tall. So you just get more attention. You get a lot more people stopping scrolling. So if you're talking about Facebook and Twitter, you're really talking about mobile. And on mobile, it should be square and it should run without audio by default because like 93% of Twitter views never turn on the audio and it's like 80% of Facebook views. So know that they will never, assume they will not turn it on. And so you have to make sure it works on mute. And the way you do that is that you review the material on your phone, on mute, right? Like try when you're actually reviewing material, and I think this about scripts too, is like don't read a script, have it read to you, because you aren't writing for reading, you're writing for listening, and that's actually different. And so trying to simulate the end viewer as a reviewer, I think you end up catching a lot of the mistakes that you might make otherwise. That was, for social, that's for sure true. For YouTube, even on mobile, people tend to turn YouTube sideways. So widescreen works again. You can play with like 16:9 versus 16:10, which is like an interesting little way to change the aspect ratio. 16:10, I think, is a little better for mobile because you do get a little more height if they are still scrolling. Yeah.
There's a question from Allison about, finding a decent videographer, animator can be tough. Do you have recommendations for websites or other places to look? Assuming someone can't work with you, but.
Yeah, I mean, assuming someone can't work with us or just doesn't like me or whatever. Yeah, that's fine. I don't have good suggestions about websites. I actually think that is a pretty good way to run into problems. I think that the people whose businesses thrive on marketplaces are really good at finding clients through marketplaces. They're not necessarily really good at video storytelling. And honestly, you should reach out to me and I will direct you to people that I think are great. Even if they're freelancers, even if they don't match us, even if for whatever reason you just don't want to work with us, I think we can find really good partners. Beyond that, I would recommend, we started an organization called DC in Motion, which is, I guess it's not an organization, it's just a brand for activities that we do. Before the lockdown, we hosted monthly happy hours and portfolio reviews. We're currently running a motion design mentorship program for people in the DC area. DC in Motion has a very thriving Slack. It's a whole little community. So motion designers, I like that. You can join the DC Motion Slack. We have a Facebook and a Twitter. No, we don't have a Twitter anymore. But also you can just reach out to me and I can direct you to the people who run that day to day, and maybe that would be helpful.
That's great.
Yeah.
Nestor asked, what are your thoughts on investing on an in-house animator for long-term plans? Kind of when is it worth it for an organization to hire internally?
Yeah. What a tricky thing, because animation takes a long time. And so one of the things that we see happen is that an organization brings in a motion designer or an animator. And real quick, animation I use as like the umbrella term for all things like moving pictures that are not captured in camera. Within that, you have stop motion, you have cell, you have motion design, which is more like built in a computer, more broadcast looking. Then you have 3D and all that. So all of that is under animation. I feel like that's useful to someone here.
That's great.
Yeah, so hiring someone full-time is a great idea because you're building capacity. The problem, of course, is that their capacity can get filled up really, really quickly. And so, you might have, think about like our average project has 2 people working on it over the course of 4 to 6 weeks. And we can kind of, because we have this whole flexible network of freelancers and everything, we can kind of grow and shrink as the demand is there. But I've seen a lot of organizations, they hire someone and then they hit their capacity and then they still have to go to an agency. And then you have this like weird dance of like what projects stay internal and what projects go to an outside firm. And I've never been on the inside, so I actually don't know what that's like, but it seems awkward. And then if they're just sitting around, honestly, a lot of motion designers are also really good designers. So I think as long as you make that a requirement for your hiring to say, hey, I'm looking for motion designers who can also do other design, you will have other design work to give them, I think. And so I would say like, if they're going to do a couple of motion pieces a year, you're probably breaking even versus hiring someone like us. The problem is, of course, you have to make sure that the first one is in the first 3 months and the second one is in the second 3 months, and it's spaced out well, because if you need 3 at once, all of a sudden that person wasn't all that valuable. But I don't know. I mean, I'm curious about how other folks here what their experience might be, because if they've managed in-house folks who do that, it's not a thing I've done before. So maybe I'm just kind of talking out of turn.
I think this is a good one. There's probably a lot of people who'd like to do this. What are some tips to spice up mundane Zoom interviews or sound bites from virtual event clips to post on social?
Yeah.
I think a lot of organizations are in this space right now, right? Where they're grabbing things off Zoom and trying to make the best of it.
I've been a big believer for a long time in what I call motion branding. Almost every organization has done some amount of branding work, right? Like everyone kind of gets this idea that one ought to have a standard logo. want not to let that logo get distorted or used in a weird way. And so you have a brand guide. Very few organizations have a video section of their brand guide. And so you end up, one vendor swoops the logo in, one vendor zooms it really close and racks it in again. One vendor pixelates it in an interesting way. And I think that's a really easy way to kind of look cheap, because the experience is different each time. So I think that like one kind of like basic level that I think every organization should do if they're going to do video is add a video section to their brand guide, in which you say, this is the animated logo we use, only this. This is how we do titles. So when we're going to bring on the title of the piece, this is how we do like lower thirds, which are the little thing at the bottom of the screen that shows, hey, this is Alex Herder and he kind of knows some things. Like that's like the minimum easy lift that will reap rewards forever, because you're always going to be making videos and you can always just go back to that. So no matter how many people you hire, you can be like, this is our motion branding kit, use it.
Good. Question about Duke and Duck from Mike DeShant. Are you in a place now at the firm where you can choose what you get to work on? Like you get to say yes to some things and no to others?
Yeah. And honestly, we've always been. We're super values driven. There's a ton of stuff we say no to. I could go into more detail, but there's a lot of stuff that just we don't think should be out in the world because we think they're bad stories or they're lies or they're promoting something that I just don't want in the world, and so we don't do it. And we've done that from the beginning. So that's always been the case. It is interesting all of a sudden that we're now at this place where we're actually sometimes having to choose between two stories we'd really like to tell. And that's really hard. It's part of why we're hiring 3 people right now. We're trying to catch up. But yeah, I think we are. I really appreciate that question. Happy to go into more detail about all of how we make those decisions, but yes.
And it's 5:55, so I want to be conscious of time. I want to be able to do this question on programs or training would you suggest if you're asked to learn animation?
Oh, what a good question. The School of Motion is my unreservedly endorsed answer to that question. School of Motion, it might be .com, I don't know, it's School of Motion. It is so awesome. I consistently will see, if I'm hiring junior people or hiring, like, we do an apprenticeship program. So if I'm hiring apprentices, I will see their work I will see School of Motion work in there, and I immediately know that they know a lot. It's a great program, and they can go into depth. Speaking of like appealing to different levels of fandom, their intro courses are really good because they actually have live TAs. I mean, you pay for it, but it's not very expensive. And the motion design world is honestly mostly a world of self-taught people because there aren't really degrees in it, or at least there weren't. There are now. But School of Motion is like, yes, it is so good.
Good. And I have one last burning question that I would just have to cover off, Alex. Why did you call the firm Duke and the Duck?
Well, my wife did it, so you can blame her. So we really wanted to get at this like fairy tale fable kind of feeling, because some studios are different in their roots. Some studios are driven by design. They're design-driven studios. We're a story-driven studio. We're very much about the stories that are being told. And fairy tales and fables have been how we make meaning and how we create connections forever. And so we wanted something that sounded like that. And then my business partner and former college roommate and best friend, Dave, his last name is Ellington. And when we first started, we played a lot of computer games together. And his name in video games was always Sir Duke. So that's it. So Duke and Duck. There it is.
That's great. Good. Well, Well, thank you again for making time to share your thoughts. Thank everyone for joining us this evening. And as I mentioned, we'll be emailing the community soon about some opportunities later this month related to ComNet. So everyone have a good evening. Stay well.
Thank you all. Thank you. Bye.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.